Hello artists and creators. In this video we're going to be talking about environment design. Often enough these pose quite a significant challenge, whether these are for films, video games, or your own personal graphic novels. These imaginative realms do require a significant amount of attention to details, and that of course requires a good degree of planning. So I am thrilled today to share several indispensable tips to help you, and particularly with the architectural aspect of these worlds. So whether you're an aspiring background artist, a character artist that just needs better scenes, or a hobbyist, there's going to be something here for you. I'm Tyler Edlin. I've been an artist and instructor now for close to 15 years, and today's episode's extra special because all the examples are going to be from past and current students. So with that said, let's dive in. Alright, so number one today is to start simple and clear. And I think any kind of start involves understanding the language in which we need to create with. So, for example, musicians need to understand how to write and how to read music. Same with the artists and designers, right? This is a visual design language. So we need to understand the components of that, which are lines, shapes, the various types of forms, basically any kind of wording we can use to describe what we need to do. Architecture is essentially about visual communication. It involves using the basic shapes to build, using the additive and subtractive methods of these forms. Great architectural designs, in my opinion, usually begin with some clear underlying concept. Is the design going to be organic or geometric? Where perhaps is it located? How is it situated into the landscapes? Or maybe it's not. What's its intended use, of course? Whether it's a home, an office building, or maybe it's some sort of villain's lair. Buildings do take cues from their surroundings, and they can transform them into some immersive experiences if we do that right. These on screen now are our basic shapes and forms. And of course, they all have their own associated meanings with them as well. Triangles are bold and aggressive, cubes are strong and stable, and spheres are soft and friendly. And the first part of our design process often involves deconstructing existing parts of reality and to apply a visual hierarchy to those basic shapes and forms. For example, this Asian architecture, primarily square, with some triangle and very little circles. And on the bottom corner opposite of that, we have retro architecture of the Googie style, primarily using triangles and a little bit of squares, and again, little to zero circles. And so my first tip is really just to trace or draw over, but to deconstruct existing parts of our own history and culture, like my awesome student Eugene here did, in order to get a better understanding of the subject matter. And then that way, once you understand what basic shapes and forms you're using, you can reform them and build new things. It's essentially the same as buying a Lego kit, throwing away the instructions, and just building your own thing from those core same pieces. And that's exactly what my student Christopher Brown did here, using the ancient Egyptian design language, right? Like, this temple does not exactly exist in this layout and in this format with these precise proportions, but it's using their ancient architectural language to come up with this idea. So the next big tip when it comes to using these basic shapes is to use them in big, medium, and small proportions. I have two awesome examples from my two students, Steffi and Amy here, right? Really cool designs. One's more Aztec based, one is more Egyptian. But watch how we break these things apart. They're using one really big shape, usually a few medium-sized shapes, and then several, often enough, smaller ones that kind of stack on top, right? Big, medium, and small. This sort of visual hierarchy is not any kind of rule or golden necessity in a sense, but it's a nice, safe way to build interesting and worthwhile designs. And basically, by lining them up using that same sort of formula like my student Zach here did, you can understand the different relationships between multiple buildings, designing a set of them. And it helps establish a sense of scale, thematic consistencies. It's just a great effective way of coming up with ideas. And more or less, this is what I have all my students do in week 1, in my architecture class. So tip number 2 today is planning and execution. You don't need to have some architectural degree. Heck, I'm no engineer. There's my disclaimer. But I do like to plan a lot of my ideas out. So for example, look on this bottom phase here, right? Fairly direct. It's just to outline the major sort of goal and some of the keywords that's going to play into that design. With phase 2 largely stemming from a set or body of references derived from that initial plan. A lot of my classes personally take place in phase 3, which is the idea generating phase from all that planning and all that gathering of reference. And you can see there's a lot of variety here. They're not all in color, they're not all perfectly drawn, but they represent the idea in a clear enough way. And that's the big thing that separates them from phase 4, right? Or the top line, where they're really technically well executed with color, light, and composition. I don't feel in a lot of the design classes, in a sense, that you need to focus so much on the technical, because the more important thing is the idea itself, and you don't need perfect drawings to do that. Just functional drawings. So for example, if I were to dive a little bit deeper here and break down my island settlement idea, this is a little bit of what that plan looked like. Again, I outlined that it's a fantasy setting in the South Pacific, in not too specific of a way, because I'm saying, island, Thailand, Samoan, or Polynesian, that it takes place in an ancient time, and that it's a fishing and trade village, right? So we have a lot of core components for our design all set up. And then I just basically get in there and list out potential problems and solutions, things like high humidity and temperature, to needing a lot of shade and using lightweight materials. And then it all kind of comes together through enough planning to come up with a much more thorough and consistent idea that feels at least a little bit more sophisticated than if I were to jump in and kind of bang that out. Now, here's another example using an Arctic research base. So for me, personally, I like to reference in various stages throughout any kind of given project. I don't front load 100% of the reference that I need all at the start, because sometimes I just can't foresee what I may or may not need, or what my own mind knows versus what it doesn't. Maybe there's gaps in my knowledge, right? So I like to find just a few very bits of clear reference at the beginning to get me started, and then as I'm getting more deeper into the idea, more specific, I get those more specific aspects of reference, how I'm going to apply the details, how I'm going to layer the materials, how I'm going to kind of build some of those smaller parts needs more specific reference. So I just get more as I need more. And then I'm able to follow that sort of process, again, starting simple and clear with the drawing. A lot of the times that means drawing into Blender after the initial form phase, and then kind of sorting out the more three-dimensional aspect of the design, and then I can finalize that into any kind of presentation. But yeah, I have students that follow hybrids and versions of that process all the time, and they just really get good at planning. Some students don't like to plan as much, and that's totally fine. If you have a simpler idea, or an idea certainly more grounded in history, or that's very relatable, just like these medieval houses here, you don't generally need as much research or references if you're doing something more, from scratch. Yeah, but I think Marina's example here is a perfect example of just getting by with some minimal planning. And here's another great idea. Again, if you're often overwhelmed by this process, or if you're new to world building or scene design, start with something that's easy to draw and very referenceable, like Janice's here, right? So you could see she clearly just outlined her idea. She broke down a lot of keywords and notes that immediately came from that idea, gathered then the necessary reference, and was able to put that into a simple drawing, right? This is just a scene that's essentially an empty cube, and we're applying the right aesthetics with a layout, the function in mind, and we can come up with a design, right? It's very intentional. All right, so tip number 3 today is to keep the design language familiar. Familiarity plays a pivotal role in design, and in my opinion, design is about problem solving. So Instead of feeling pressured to create something that is entirely original, something unprecedented, strive to incorporate familiar elements that can anchor your design in reality. Drawing from inspiration from various cultures and historical contexts will in fact enrich your work exactly as much as it needs to. And you can, of course, aim for subtlety rather than overt references. One technique I often recommend to students to do this is through biassociation. That's mixing two unrelated things together. Here, student A, sorry, I don't have the name, combined Norwegian-style Viking houses with staplers, with the functionality that he was going to make boat houses. So as you could see, he came up with like a really cool, clever idea of like these boat houses that factor in both those two sources. Similarly, James here wanted to create some sci-fi yurt structures for off-world sort of camping, and he used power tools as a base for those ideas, essentially kind of just drawing directly from the forms and the combination of those shapes. And it worked out really, really well. So they're not just entirely all random. One of my other students used a different technique I call kind of reskinning, where she took the basic shapes and forms of traditional camping tents and applied a reskin of that using seashells and favelas, right? These poor little makeshift homes. And it comes together to formulate a really nice, consistent design. And that, of course, that starts with just the core shapes, the proportions of those forms, right? You can see big, medium, and small in there. It looks great. Then you start adding in the structural needs, right? Things like doors, things like windows, any kind of ladders, stairs, and supports. And then you can start worrying more specifically about the materials and how that exterior comes together. But yeah, a really great example of that. I guess a more simple version of this would be from my student at week 2, Nikita here, right? Really awesome design. This is traditional classic architecture, right? It's very Greek and Rome in terms of shape and form. But aesthetically, it's taking on a different role. It's much more cyberpunk. It's much more modern, overall. And again, because he's mixing the two sort of aesthetics. And the third way that you can apply this to your designs would be to recontextualize something that we already have an understanding of. So in these examples, these are all ancient Egypt, but in a way that's not entirely 100% familiar to us. In this one example, it's made from a dam in a lush jungle sort of area, which we know Egypt is not in a lush jungle, and they probably didn't have the need to make dams, but it comes together to make a really interesting design. In this one here, there's more of like a steampunk aesthetic applied to ancient Egypt, which gives it a whole different new flavor. But we could still recognize a lot of these, these shapes that we know and love from Egypt, like the pyramids and these smaller tombs and even residential houses throughout the city. And these examples are kind of similar, but they're using the design language of ancient Egypt to come up with new and fun forms by just kind of combining them in new and fresh ways. So tip number 4 today is storytelling. Anytime you can bring storytelling into your design, it's always going to make it better. Even if it's something simple like an interior of a shop or some sort of pre-existing external structure, like a tower, right? If the tower has a story, it's better. If a little shop has a story, it's going to be better. Visual storytelling is about crafting a representation of the world as you envision it, rather than merely replicating reality. Think of it as constructing sets filled with evocative lighting. Maybe it's got dynamic shapes. Maybe there are those elements of compelling narratives in there. Instead of striving for strict realism, focusing on capturing the essence of your idea will often help it in a more efficient way. So infuse your designs with a piece of yourself, or when in doubt, imbuing them with authenticity and depth can add a whole other layer to the design. And this is a fun one from week 7 of my class, where Christian Bunyan here wanted to make a hipster cannibal cafe, right? Maybe he's not a cannibal. I'm not going to judge him too much if he is, but yeah, maybe if he's a hipster. And again, I won't judge him too much if he is, but it's an awesome, unique kind of combination for a cafe, right? It's not just another generic cafe. And all these elements kind of come together to add to a really nice, unique sort of setting for his setup here. Or when my other student Guida here wanted to do this sort of harmonious nature, futuristic sort of house setup for her robots and other characters, she kind of came up with a really unique sort of vision for that. So all of this is related, right? We're limiting the materials. We're thinking about how the inside relates to the outside. Everything here, is there for basically a reason. From the smaller machines to the gardening aesthetics to the way the tools are there and how they're set up and used together. So that is a great example of putting some narrative elements into a design to give it a lot more personality. And it could be simpler than that. It doesn't even have to be some big complex thing like my student Mina here from last term, who wanted to just do a pastry shop. Simply just asking, what is it? It's a pastry shop. It's a retro pastry shop. When is it? Is it really old or has it been renovated? Where is it? Is it in America or is it in China? And who's it for? Who runs it? The what, who, where, when, why, and hows. Just ask those questions and immediately you'll start making your design like 400% better. Gather the references, you can implement it. Having a good drawing with a nice color job on top is just the icing on the cake. Unintended. Love it. And my last tip for today, tip number 5, involves drawing versus designing. Right? So when we're generating an idea, we are really talking, or at least I'm talking more about than just simply just doing another arbitrary drawing, let's say of a house. It's more than just sketching for the sake of it. So consider this, right? If I replicate a house precisely from a single reference, am I truly designing it? I'd say not. I'm really just doing a drawing of a house. The distinction, of course, always lies in between the lines. It lies in the context of the drawing and that overall underlying intent. So these are all great student examples of that, right? These are all very intentional drawings. This is not just an interior space. This is a bunker safe house for some sort of lunatic or some sort of killer, right? They're hiding lots of things here, trying to be safe about it. Or this is a very specific sort of propaganda room for the resistance, right? Where they could film their messages and broadcast them and hide lots of supplies. They're living very thriftily, on the edge. Every story is there. Or this is a great one from Anna, who's building like these cliffside dwellings for her fantasy race, and she's putting all sorts of cultural connections in between every one of the drawings in the design, right? These aren't just focused on being technically well drawn, even though these are all pretty technically well drawn. The idea always should come first. That should be the most important part. Just like Michael's atomic, bowling alley drive-in here. This is fantastic. And he did this in week 7 and 8. Because if a student wants to do a project and let it take a little longer like this, I absolutely let them. And because I don't think I mentioned it yet, we are scheduling for the spring term for my architecture course at CGMA. There will be a link below for those interested. But yeah, these are all projects that more or less come from that course. So if you can add your elements of storytelling and you can implement them in some sort of way where you can almost see like a cutaway, we see how the inside relates to the outside. For some students, I recommend just designing the outside first in a simple sort of way, then work your way in. But you could totally reverse engineer things too, right? Where you start with the inside layout based off the needs of a character or a story moment and then design the outside around that. You could go either way. But if you're just applying actual thought to it, that's a good place to start. Here's a great example from last term from Emily, and you can kind of see it. There's just enough thought and care put into every aspect of this drawing for this interior that really makes it feel nice. It feels consistent and cohesive, and that's fantastic. Really is. Every little bit here, there's individual props that are designed, different decorations, how those decorations are laid out, right? Designs are multi-layered, and they require different stages, of course, to implement all these elements. So you just start with the core structure. It's a big square room. Add what the scene needs in terms to function. So maybe you add the tables and the stairway to get up to the second floor, and you think, oh, they need lights in here, right? You add the chandelier. And then you can start adding the smaller, more aesthetic parts to it, right? So go from big to small or structural to personal when it comes to a space like this. So if you guys want to take some action and practice this on your own, Start by just drawing a simple shape or room design, right? And this is not a design yet. This is just an observation, right? It's a study. It's a kind of a bit of a perspective exercise, but give it a purpose. Make yourself out a prompt or a problem to solve. That way you can implement all these things you just learned about design to give that space a purpose, a functional purpose, all right? And it'll work out fantastic. And that's the difference between drawing and designing, is it's not just copying, it's not just observing, it's applying intent to every decision that you're kind of making. All right, so I'm actually gonna have a bonus tip because I just kind of thought of one as we went, and that's to add multi-functions or multiple interactions in a scene. Now, if you can do this at a human scale level where it's easy to draw, easy to understand, that's even better. I had an awesome student, Josh Ash, do this with one of his train factories, and that's what I'm talking about here. See, like, this is not just some interior of a big train factory. It's also utilizing this kind of furnace refinery aesthetic, right? So it's got the train, it's a refinery, it's got this whole lion and wings sort of aesthetic, right? These are multiple designs all coming together cohesively in one scene. And that's, again, what AI is really struggling with right now. So if you're in that potential sort of lane where you want to create a portfolio for games or film, think like this. Think like Josh did here, right? Multiple different things getting designed all consistently in one scene. The more you can do that, the more you can beat AI. Here's another great design too, right? He has the exterior for that. He's got numerous kind of form and design sketches to go with that. And again, to circle back, it just took a lot of planning to put this all together. So if you're jumping at an idea and you're just getting frustrated an hour or two in, just kind of realize you're just beginning. You got to spend a lot more time to refine that idea out, all right? And even if it's not a pretty drawing or a fancy painting, you could just have it be a nice serviceable drawing like Michael's here, who does an awesome idea, where again, we could see in a very consistent way a very kind of clear goal that he's kind of working toward when it comes to drawing and designing this ancient Greek train platform, right? So again, another great example of what to aim for here. But yeah, that's going to wrap this up. Building worlds, coming up with scenes, creating architecture, it can be an exhilarating endeavor. I personally love doing it. And I think for yourselves, if you want to make it just more manageable, follow the steps in the video, right? Start simple, plan things enough, keep them relatable, consider what elements you could use for storytelling, and never lose sight of the idea itself. All right, guys, so let me know if you have any thoughts on this. I got links below for everything you need. Definitely check that out, and I'll catch you guys next time.